welcome to a Career Pathways event on work-life balance. It's the Preparing Future Faculty event, and it can also count towards the Preparing Future Professionals. So if you're interested in either of those certificate programs, this is an event that will count towards meeting those requirements. I'm Lee Youssef. I'm actually co-chair with Chris Osgood of the Career Pathways program here at ODU. And if you're unaware or unfamiliar with the program, just this year we're introducing a brand new Preparing Future Professionals certificate program for graduate students who are interested in careers that are not related necessarily directly in the academy. So those who might be interested in working in government, nonprofits, or the private sector, the Preparing Future Professionals program is also a professional development, career development option for you. We're very lucky today that Jamila Glover has agreed to moderate, and on behalf of all of us in the room, we congratulate Jamila for a successful defense.
Thank you.
Of participation. So she is also here to kind of remind everybody that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And Jamila will be taking it from here.
Okay. Well, welcome. Thank you guys for attending. As Dr. Youssef mentioned, I just completed my dissertation and will enter the job market. So one thing that I learned through my journey is that it's important to start thinking about work-life balance before you actually get in the field so that you're not somewhat panicking the way I am at the moment, trying to figure out how to navigate it and manage work-life balance. So with that being said, I will ask the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started with some questions. Please feel free to engage in the conversation. If you have a question while we're talking, just go ahead, raise your hand or shout it out, and I'll repeat it so that everyone on the line can hear. And it can be more of a dialogue rather than us just talking at the front.
I'm Steve Myran. I'm an associate professor of educational leadership and the chair of our department.
I'm Sara Maxwell. I'm an assistant professor in the biology department.
I'm Steve Lanivich. I'm an assistant professor of entrepreneurship and management in the Department of Management.
So I'm going to start with the first question, and anybody can jump in and answer. To say we care about work-life balance means that we actually have a demanding work schedule. So one, could you talk about some of the demands that you face and also why work-life balance is important to you?
Sure. So I'll jump in. Your job is very demanding, right? If you're going to stay in academia, you should be writing all the time or researching all the time. I know you hear that a lot, but it's not a cliche. Right? If you want to stay marketable, if you want to stay relevant, you need to be doing your research all the time. And this does make work-life balance tough because you can't walk away from it most of the time, right? You carry your thoughts with you all of the time. And you're going to need to find a way to at least escape a little bit, right? Find some time to set aside that's just your time. While you're getting a lot of work done, right? And it can be really tough. So I know, at least for me, it took me a couple of years to figure out that I was going to need to get up out of my desk, away from campus, away from everything for a couple of hours, find something to do that was absolutely not research, absolutely not anything to do with academia, and that's helped me out quite a bit.
I would agree with that. I would say, though, it would be great to do your research all the time, but I think that the harder part of it, at least for me, is making sure there is time within every day to do the research, because there's always a balance between service commitments, graduate students, teaching, undergraduate students, paperwork. Dear Lord, there's a lot of paperwork. And then in addition, trying to do research, right, which includes writing grants, writing papers, doing analysis, field work, all of those things. As a biologist, there's quite a bit of field work involved often. So being sure to set aside time every day to do those things. And you will hear me say this multiple times today. I have very heavily utilized the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. ODU just became a member a year ago, I believe, maybe a little over a year ago. But I've been actually using them since I was in graduate school. Towards the end of my graduate studies, I friends turned me on to this organization, and I have been a huge proponent of them. I love them, I love them, I love them, I love them. For ODU, as a member, you basically have access to all of their online webinars and curriculum, which include things like planning and time management, and if you have kids, how to balance that in academia, how to have healthy conflict if you're in arts and letters, how to write a book proposal, all kinds of things like that, and it spans all the way up through even post-tenure kind of things. But even if you don't plan to go into academia, the skills that they teach are universal. Basically how to plan your time when you end up in a field, as you undoubtedly will, where you are much more self-driven and where you're going to have a lot of different things on your plate that you're trying to balance and set down and pick up and set down and pick up, because you're undoubtedly never going to be able to focus on just one thing regardless of what your career is going forward. So I highly recommend that. They do every week, they do an email called the Monday Motivator, where they kind of focus on one issue that people often have, whether it's around writing or whether it's around self-doubt or planning your time or all kinds of things. And that's a really great email to get every week. There's always really good thoughts in there, so I highly recommend that.
Yeah. In fact, this week the Monday Motivator was a 30-minute writing challenge, and so I have writing time blocked off, but I often let my administrative and other responsibilities invade that time, and I know better, but I do it anyhow. But the Monday Motivator, even though I know better, it got me, okay, I am good. And this week, I have been much better at protecting that time.
Yeah.
So even if it's things you know, just having it pop up every Sunday night is really valuable. So I think the first part of the question was sort of the range of work and then how you manage that. I think, picking up on a couple of other things that were talked about is just the range of things that one has to do in faculty life. And it, of course, is true of any kind of work, really, ranges from conceptualizing, writing when you're engaged in really complex theoretical development where you can't be interrupted. Like this, I'm in the middle of this thought. It's taken me 45 minutes and I'm about to write this critical paragraph, and you can't be interrupted. You need that time to really be engaged. It ranges from that all the way to really mundane things, forms, paperwork that needs to get filled out, right? And so it's not just the time, it's the sort of mental energy that it takes to do that work. So one of the mistakes that I've often made in my sort of balancing my schedule and workload is not being cognizant of the kind of attention that particular tasks require. So scheduling writing time on Friday afternoon, for example, maybe not the best time, right? You're tired, you've had a long week, you've got this block of time and you're sitting there and you're feeling guilty that you're not getting anything done. So I think being cognizant of the range of work that you do and scheduling your work at times that are going to make sense for that. So I try to make my Fridays catching up on things like catching up on emails, categorizing, turning emails into tasks, double checking my task list, things that don't require a tremendous amount of my mental energy. So that's and then sort of going back to sort of finding time for other things. I think it goes together. So I hate the idea of scheduling free time, but I think you have to be. I think you have to be cognizant of I'm blocking this time out. I'm not thinking about work because I make notes for myself on my cell phone, walking back and forth from home to work. I'm always thinking about the next thing. I'm always thinking about class, writing, what have you. And so you got to be able to turn that off. I have kids, and so one way that I do that is when I'm with my kids, that's it. I turn it off. And I find it's not an excuse to turn it off, but it forces me to. So So that's one thing to think about is when it comes to your family, you just have to set it aside. And then when you need to work on a weekend or you need to work in an evening, then letting people know that and getting their support that I'm gonna disappear in my office for a couple hours.
Okay. So faculty have similar but slightly different challenges with work-life balance than graduate students or postdocs. Do you see, or how do you see work-life balance as an issue for graduate students? Or do you see it as an issue, or what advice do you have?
I can jump in here.
Sure.
I was a graduate student, maybe, I don't know how far along you guys are, but not terribly long. How many of you guys know the person who comes into the office at, 10 o'clock, and they're always so busy, and they're always there until 10 p.m. Oh, I'm so busy, I have so much to do. And then how many times you walk into their office and they're checking Facebook? Right. So this was a lesson that I learned in grad school, and I learned this, one of my mentors, he told me that when he was in graduate school, he had kids. He ended up with 3. I'm not sure how many he had during graduate school, but he used to come in at 7 in the morning, and then he would leave at 4. And he would get, 4 hours of work done before the other students would even roll into the office, and he would actually be working during that time. And then he would go home at 4 o'clock in the afternoon because he had kids and he wanted to go home and hang out with his kids. And everybody was kind of like, looking at him like he wasn't getting any work done, but they were having long leisurely coffees and, chit-chatting and all of this kind of thing. He was very focused on getting his work done. Not that there's not benefit to talking and interacting and that kind of thing, but basically he kept that to a minimum so that he could do what was really the other important aspect of his life, which was spending time with his family. And I really took that to heart, and I certainly knew those people in graduate school. And I think that it's important to value yourself in certain ways. I think that the ability to do other things is even greater than it was for my mentor when he was in graduate school, because this would have been pre-internet. I personally am not actually on social media. I do Instagram with my family, and that's it. I'm not on Facebook. I do use Twitter for work things occasionally, although my student is here and can tell you that it's really hit or miss. But basically, I try very hard when I'm at work to be at work. And there's no reason why we can't do that as a student as well. And I think that one of my other mentors, who was a bit more of a peer but still ahead of me, she told me when I finished my PhD that the postdoc years are the time to really work on work-life balance. Because if you don't set that up, then you are setting yourself up to basically for misery going forward. And I really took that to heart, because I felt like in graduate school I didn't really know what I was doing, and I didn't really have the skills to be efficient. And so from postdoc on, I really focused on efficiency. And then the National Center for Faculty Diversity and Development was huge for that in terms of giving me the skills to do that. So for example, now I schedule my time. I actually have a buddy that we sit down every week, like usually Thursday or Friday the week before, and we literally make our task list and we put our tasks into our calendar the week before that week even happens. And granted, stuff happens, and very frequently I don't get through everything in that week, but I can guarantee you I get so much more done than I would if I hadn't done it in the first place. If I just sat down at my desk and kind of went, what do I need to do today, or what do I feel like doing today? Because there's the urgent and there's the important. The important are the things like writing your thesis, publishing papers, blah, blah, blah. The urgent are things like grading papers or preparing for your class that you're TAing, or doing some other task that should be done soon but maybe isn't actually going to get you where you really want to go in the long term. And so by scheduling your time, you're literally scheduling time for the important. And you can put the urgent in there, but it really it keeps it from spreading in, as you said, because I do the same thing. Let other things kind of weasel their way into my writing time. I always schedule my writing time in the morning because I'm fresher, I think better. And also there's less chance of something trying to, shove its way in there. And I think personally, this is a good time to start to work on those things, because I have a son now, he's 14 months old, And feel like I have been working for many years to make space for him in my life, so that when he was born, I could give my all to him when I'm with him, because I wouldn't feel like in the evenings I needed to still be working, that I didn't still have this mentality that I had in grad school where work was everything. Now I have space for him, and I'm the same way. When I am home, I'm with him. I don't work in the evenings. I don't check my email. I don't try and shove little bits of work into the evening. When I'm home, I'm with him, because I can guarantee you I'll look back 20 years from now, and I won't be thinking about the emails and the little things that I didn't do. What I will be thinking about if I did do those things, or why the heck did I do that? I have this little child in my life, and he's more important. So this is definitely the time to start working towards that efficiency.
I'll just echo what Sara said. These habits that you're forming now, or this is the time that you should be forming the habits that you're going to take into your career life. If you're slacking and running around all frazzled now, you're probably going to slack and run around all frazzled through at least the first few years of your career. So if you can start to kind of tailor that off and schedule things out and block time in a way that makes you more efficient and effective at what you want to be doing, like focusing on the things that are really important, now is the time to begin doing that, right? It's so for my students, I guess in the department of management, we find maybe about half of the grad students are coming straight in through through a life of academia, and some have been out and done other things and then come back to academia. And there's a stark contrast between those that have gone straight through and those that have gone and done a little bit outside of academia and then come back. And the difference is usually those people that have been out in the outside of academia world. I don't want to say the real world. Our world is real. It's just different. Yeah. Right? Those people have learned to set their schedule for what the outside world jobs look like, right? So that they know how to work a 9 to 5. And it can be really difficult if you've never experienced that before, because you've been a student so far in your life. But the more you can kind of work yourself into what your schedule is going to be like for your working life now, I think you're setting yourself up to have those good habits. Otherwise, I find that a lot of my colleagues and fellows that I've gone through, that I went through the process with, and that I've guided through the process so far, really struggle those first few years to identify themselves in their career path and find, like you're saying, the schedule that's going to just take care of the important stuff. And that's prime time, right? You're getting a lot of exposure when you first walk out into your first job. You're building in, or hopefully you're building up your pipeline, not just finishing your dissertation. And you really have a very limited window to make an impression on the people at your institution, at your first job, and to get enough stuff out there to where you could be tenured, right? And I think the idea is that you would hopefully be tenured in your first job if you're looking to move up. But even then, maybe on the same track, right, within the first 6-7 years of being out. And all those habits start now. Right? You have to start thinking about this as, you're not in school anymore. This is on-the-job training, right? This is an apprenticeship. You should be treating it like it is your job now. And you probably. So I think the original question was like, how are the pressures? How are the demands different? And I think the outcomes are different, right? The demands themselves are different, but the pressure is the same, right? You're experiencing those same deadlines and pressures now that you're going to experience later on in your career, right? The title on what is due is going to be different, but that pressure you feel, that stress that you feel due to the demands on your life, it's the same feeling, right? So get used to that. That part doesn't go away. The demand that it's from your chair, or the demand of your dissertation, or the demand that it's from the chair of your department doesn't make much difference up here, right? So I think the more you can start to think about this as work, this as your job, this as your career now, the better off you're going to be going forward. Because now you probably can afford to slip a little, right? And maybe even in the first couple of years you can still slip a little. But then you're going to make that tenure push in years 3, 4, 5. And if you don't have it down by then, if you don't have the pipeline set up, if you're not doing the things that lead towards a tenurable vita by then, you're going to be moving. You're going to be taking some steps backwards. right? And I'm sure you're here because you don't want that to happen, right?
Yeah. So it's funny that you talked about the parallels, and that's what was going through my mind as well when a few years back when my wife was a graduate student, we were both working on our laptops in the evening, and she said, "What are you working on?" And I said, I'm trying to finish this article. And she said, "We're both doing the same thing. I'm writing a paper for my professor and for a grade. You're writing an article for a journal editor, and you want good reviews so that you get a revise and resubmit as opposed to a rejection, right? I want to pass the class. You want to get something published." And so I use that now in talking to my students. I'm saying we're engaged in the same kinds of work. You know, we experience the same kinds of pressures, and so it's a continuum of development. The other thing related to this is reward, incentives in terms of how you balance out all those pressures. So one of the frustrations, I think, for grad students and for faculty on the tenure track line is you have these competing demands for your time, but only some of those things are rewarded, right? And so folks ask you to be involved in things, even just coming here, right? There's not a huge reward, there's not a huge incentive to coming to these kinds of things. Now, maybe you put it on your vita as part of your service. I would have done that prior to being tenured. I would have figured out a way to put this on my vita for service, right? And so there's an element there where you're feeling like, oh, I don't want to be selfish. I want to be a part of the community of learners. I want to be, part of the community of scholars. But what happens is folks that are overly engaged in that side of things aren't getting their writing done, right? They're not moving their dissertation along, right? So these things are parallel. So I think one of the things is to think about, at the risk of being selfish, is where are the rewards? Where are the incentives? Am I putting my time to things that matter in the long run, in the mid and the long run, right? So are you going to conferences and making connections to people in the field? Are you creating those networks and those pipelines that are going to bear fruit down the road? Or are you doing the things that are in the moment are expedient and are you the person that people go to help get things done? If you have a particular knack in statistics, you're going to be the person that other students come to for advice, and you gotta be able to say no at least some of the time, and make your grad studies your job. Go in your office, close your door. If you have a cubicle, of course you can't close the door, but maybe put headphones on, right? Be selfish and plug away at the things that are going to get you to the next step.
So we know Dr. Maxwell doesn't work typically, generally speaking, once she gets home at night. How else do you guys manage work-life balance? Do you work at home, or is there like a deadline cut off?
Sure. So I don't have children, so my schedule is a little bit more on my own, which may match a lot of you. Maybe still in that situation, as you just started your career. So I can work and do whatever I want, whenever I want, most of the time, right? Save for meetings and my teaching schedule. And I found that I can get my best work done at night when nobody is calling or bothering me or doing anything. So I live like a night owl schedule, but it's still the same principles, right? Like I'm still finding that certain times work best for me to be productive. Certain times work best for me to kind of cut loose and disconnect. So for me personally, I find that if I can go and get most of my chores and errands done during the day while everybody else is at work and there's no traffic, that saves me some time. Then I can come home and work while everybody is traveling and on the road a little bit, and then maybe work into the evening a little bit longer. And I also try to find time, and we kind of touched on this already, right? You have to try to block off time to do stuff that's not work stuff. And I think that's really important. So, I would recommend that you do something that's not so related to what you do now, right? So most of you are probably in this profession because you like to read and you like to do puzzles and things along those lines. Maybe you're in biology and you like to be out in the woods and hike and stuff. I'm just going off here.
I do.
Okay. But those types of things, if you're doing that in your recreation, are going to, they're easily correlated and relatable to the things that you do in your job life. So I try to find something, I tried to find something and have found something that is completely away from my work life. So I play beach volleyball, actually, with we sometimes. Right? And there's nothing, well, I shouldn't say nothing, right? You can always draw parallels, but it's very hard for me to draw a lot of entrepreneurship and business-related correlations to volleyball, especially while I'm playing. Right? So I can just get out there, I can get beat up by the sun and all of the young kids with springy legs, but I'm not thinking about work, right? And I think that that's really important. So maybe try to think about finding some time. We talked about blocking it off for work, and you guys hear that stuff all the time, right? You've got to be productive, you've got to make blocks for work, but find something that you can do that is not work. Right, that's really important. Whether you do that in the mornings, you do that in the middle of the night, I think the further away that you can make that thing that you do that's not work, the further away you can remove yourself from the things that you do that are work, the more effective that time will be spent. Right? Maybe the more relief you'll get from your actual work.
Yeah, for me, fitness has been a huge part of this. Navigating the stress. I mean, again, parallel stress, right? Trying to finish the dissertation, entering the job market, right? And parallel stress to working towards tenure. And as you said, that first year you got a little wiggle room. Second year, a little wiggle room, and then no wiggle room. You gotta be working. And so that I found that. I had rediscovered, I'd been a swimmer and a runner, and I kind of slacked off, and I re-engaged and do triathlons. And so, when I'm running, I don't listen to headphones. I find the pool is very meditative. I go at lunch and swim for an hour, and I just turn off my brain. I just let the thoughts come in and go like a meditation, and for me that's been huge. And so, one, I have that escape from stress for that moment, but then also the being fit. Also, I have more energy for the work, and I manage my stress a little bit better as a result. So that's a huge piece for me to managing the work-life balance, and I have more energy also then for my family as well, and I'm less of when I slack off from exercise, I'm more grumpy just in general, and so we're often more grumpy to the people closest to us, right? Unfortunately, and so that has a benefit as well.
I would echo those things too. Also, exercise is huge for me. From stress management, and also meditation. I do meditation regularly. Lately, I've been not quite as good. It's a little hard with a toddler, but
Sure.
That has been hugely for managing stress.
What is your name?
Jamie.
Jamie, and what department are you in?
Biology.
Biology. What's your question, Jamie?
Do you work out on campus, or do you go to a separate gym to keep it as like your time?
Yeah.
Because I've had issues with students coming up to me in the middle of my runs. Jamie, I have a question.
So, for the internet, Jamie asked, do they exercise on campus or off campus?
Yeah, that's great. I swim here, but no, I come in and I make a beeline for the pool, and I usually run to get to the pool. So, and then I leave. So, and I don't generally partly for that reason. I generally don't use the other facilities.
Well, Jamie, I do use the facilities here, and And if they ask me, I just let them know I'm happy to answer your question either after my workout or during my office hours.
Right.
But please come see me.
Yeah, that's good.
I do off campus for the exact reason that you say. Well, when we first moved here, I belonged to the Y because I just didn't want, I'm all sweaty, to deal with that. But I do kickboxing and I do it off campus. Although somewhat, Marla is actually is part of the gym as well. And then I also have I have a mom's group that I work out with my son, which is kind of great. Also, yeah, I did that this morning, and I take advantage of the flexible schedule that we have. So basically, I usually about 2 mornings a week I do that, and then I basically will work earlier 2 other mornings a week so that I can do that. And it's really nice because I like it because it is so completely separate. Like I just don't. I mean, these people wouldn't even know what to ask me about work if they wanted to. So it's really, I can focus much more on this other aspect of my life. And in graduate school, I found that was really important to have separation. My lab was all about elephant seals when I was in graduate school. And oh my gosh, the number of parties I went to where all people talked about were elephant seals were enough to just... And so I very actively sought out friends that were not in graduate school with me because I felt like I really needed that. I needed that separation because, I mean, seals are cool, but come on, guys, there's more to life. So that was really important to me and continues to be. So I have a pretty big friend circle here that's not at all related to work. So.
Thank you.
I work out off campus also. Even though we do have volleyball nets here. I still prefer to go out, and it's for that reason too, right? Like you want that to be your separation time.
Right.
So if you can go someplace and have no chance of being interrupted by work stuff, I think that's the better route.
Yeah, the other thing that comes out of this though is that expanding your circle of friends beyond other academics. I know when we have people over at the house, it's a mix. And I often, it's my own fault, but I often find myself talking to other academics, and my wife will come over and can you not talk about, maybe you guys could not be such academic nerds all the time. And it's sometimes we're like, okay, you're absolutely right, and we sort of re-engage in the larger group. But otherwise, you're just locked into this little academic world. And you realize that we care about this stuff desperately in a lot of cases, but you talk to other people, they're like, wow, you get really excited about such a really nuanced and small thing, and you need that little reality check that, yeah, it matters a lot to us in our little microfield.
Yeah, and just to kind of build off that too, it's really easy because this is what you're thinking about all the time, and then you have people that are also thinking about it. So, for those of us that are a little bit socially awkward, right, and let's face it, most academics, we tend to gravitate to academia maybe because of that even. You've got to challenge yourself to not do that, right, to not get sucked into the easy conversation that could just be about work, so you can stand around other people and look like you're having a social scene. You've got to get out there, and you've got to just get a little bit uncomfortable. So I have to teach this a lot in entrepreneurship, right? You've got to get a little bit comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think if you challenge yourself to do that in social situations, you end up helping yourself out quite a bit too to make that separation. Like you're saying, it's expanding your network out. And, I think if you start doing that again after a hiatus of being trapped in your books for, a decade maybe, you start to find that, everybody else out there, they're willing to talk to you about other stuff too. There is other stuff out there besides like you said, the real narrow thing that you've been focusing on for so long. And you'll find yourself relating to people a lot easier maybe than you think you would in your head.
I am actually married to someone else who's also a professor here, and so that gets that can get tricky. But we will basically just be like, okay, we're not talking about. In some ways, it's great because he understands the nuances of what's, how it works. I mean, because I joke he's an amazing teacher, and I joke he actually got my parents to understand graduate school because it is this, I was just saying this to Jerry the other day, it's this totally amorphous concept. Academia is, like, you're doing what? So you're teaching classes. So what classes are you teaching? Well, I'm teaching one class. Well, that's all you're doing? Is it? Well, no. You know, it's hard for people outside of our world to understand what the heck we do all day. So it's really nice in that regard, but we'll just basically be like, okay, that's it. You know, but then it's great at the same time because we can have long walks and talk about boosted regression trees, which for some reason we find to be very exciting. You know, so I joke our son's going to know like a ridiculous amount of really strange things, but he learns to really talk.
So I'm Maxwell. I'm also from biology department. Since my boss just left, I'm convinced. Well, I listen to people talking about scheduling and separation between, the tasks that you need to do, work and life, and having family and accomplishing something. Well, during my last 5 years of being a PhD student, I shut down everything like social life, never been to a gym or doing any of the things that I need to do or feel like I want to do. But still, I'm just like everyone else, accomplishing the same amount of work, not being outstanding, like doing stuff more than the others. I wonder how people would find the time to do other stuff. I try to do scheduling. I try to write down like to-do lists, but never worked. That's why I'm here.
So one of the things that I'd say, just from a big picture standpoint, is, and I partly learned this from my dad, who's also an academic. He was constantly looking for the next scheduling management kind of strategy. He was always utilizing something new. And the thing I learned from him is it's a journey, and you are going to fall short all the time. And in an environment where there's a lot of competition and a lot of pressure, no one's willing to say, it was me, I made a mistake, I did it wrong, right? It's not the climate often for that kind of, forgiving each other, for not being what, we hope we could be, and then more importantly, sort of forgiving ourselves. So that doesn't answer your question, but just frames it in, we have to be, this stuff can really eat you alive, right? The pressure of tenure can cause a lot of emotional harm. And same thing in a graduate program. And I think we need to be able to stop and say, I'm not perfect. I'm human just like everybody else. And the other thing is, there are going to be people who are more productive than you. They're just going to, right? And there's going to be a handful that are less. And you just have to, this is who I am. I'm fallible, and I'm doing my best. And then I think with that position, then you can try different strategies and see what you can do. But if you don't have that underlying sense, the risk is you're just going to beat yourself up. And from a psychological standpoint, that's not where we're not going to be at our best performance when we have self-doubt, our self-efficacy is low, right? In psych, there's this interesting sort of upward spiraling or downward spiraling interaction between our self-efficacy and our engagement with the learning community. So if our self-efficacy is low, we're less engaged, right? We're learning less, right? And it's a downward spiral, and it's the opposite happens. So just sort of situate it with some deep faith in yourself.
I was going to say, for me, if I work all the time, I am so inefficient. So basically having that time away, particularly exercise, and I guess I keep saying exercise, but really what it is something that uses a totally different part of my brain. And exercise just naturally does that. It's moving your body. Like it could be knitting, or like so ridiculous costumes for my son for Halloween. Like, anything that really just kind of changes it up I feel like it gives all of a sudden more space, and I come back to things much more efficient. Like, I find that particularly exercise my ideal exercise time is about like noon or 1. like at that point where I start to get that lull in the afternoon. And then if I can do that and then come back to work, like it's amazing what I can get done after that. So breaks, I think, actually increase efficiency. I mean, there are studies that actually show that breaks increase efficiency. And the other thing, so I'm a big proponent of the saying, work expands to fill the space you give it. So if you give yourself, so everybody here has graded papers, right? You probably have all done TA at some point. If you give yourself, you have a stack of 20 papers, and you give yourself 6 hours to grade those papers, that's probably going to take you 6 hours. If you give yourself 2 hours to grade those, it's probably going to take you 2 hours, or at least a lot less than 6. So I think you have to, if you basically decide to work all the time, that's probably why you're still doing the same level, because you're giving yourself more time to do probably what other people are maybe giving themselves less time to do. And so you start to get more efficient. Parenthood has been amazing for that. But like yesterday, for example, I woke up I actually got a full night's sleep last night, or 2 nights ago, which was amazing. So I woke up at 6, and I started working at 6, and I basically didn't go home until 5:30, which was kind of unusual. I had a little bit of time off in there, but by the end of the day, I had no juice left. I ended up like working on reimbursements because I just had literally no mental brain power whatsoever left. And I can't do that. I know I can't do that all the time. I maybe could have done that in my early 20s, but I sure can't do that now. Like, I just literally physically can't do it. And I recognize that in myself. And so I try and set myself up to have realistic expectations of what I can do in a week, in a time frame, and then I move forward from there. Because ultimately, I would love to like write 3 papers in a week, but it's never going to happen. And so if I put myself in that position, then I also set myself up to fail, and then I get in a cycle of, I'm failing, and then I'm harder, but it's just, you're on a horrible treadmill that just doesn't get you anywhere, I think. It hurts. It's painful, like as a human being, to be in that cycle, I think. So, and I've certainly done it, but.
So it amazes me how these axioms just kind of, flow all the way through, our different colleges and departments and things that we do in life. But I think that it's a really good sign that most of these things are the things that everybody is dealing with all the time. And these are great nuggets, right? Like, you've got to be able to forgive yourself. I mean, that's just good life advice, but it especially holds true in the academic world if you're publishing competitively. And you have to be aware that you are going to do things the way that you set them up to happen, right? So if you set something up to take a certain amount of time, it most likely is going to take that amount of time, right? It's, we say the same thing about how, your expenses are going to rise to meet your income. Right? It's just going to happen. You guys will all experience that too once you graduate. Right? It's like this, somehow you're getting by right now on pennies, right? And then you're going to leave here and have an income, and then all of a sudden that won't be enough either. But so, it's just some direct advice for you. Just do this stuff, right? Like, stop worrying about it. Just go do something, right? And then if something falls off, you're going to find that probably wasn't the most important thing in your life, and that's why it fell off. So just go do the stuff that you think should be important first, and the things that fall to the wayside probably were meant to.
And also focus on the things that are fulfilling to you. Like, I feel like I am an accidental academic because I basically just sort of was like, I really am interested in X, Y, and Z. This is important to me. And then it was like, oh wow, look, I have a CV that works in academia. And I had this conversation with my husband while we were camping where I was like, I don't want anybody to tell me what to do. If I have an idea, I want to be able to just do it and all these things. And he's like, you know what you're describing, don't you? Academia. And my response was an expletive that I'm not going to say. But like, I feel like part of why I feel calm in academia is that I'm pretty good at sort of like pushing out what I think other people's expectations are for me. And I focus on what's important. I do a lot of conservation work. So I'm focused on, I want to get this thing done to do conservation. I also happen to like writing. So it works out, it kind of, it was a combination of those two things. But I'm driven by myself much more than the expectations of people around me. And I think that gives me much more fulfillment, and it allows me to figure out what's important and focus on those things.
I'll give a concrete example about filling the time. So, like preparing for class, to teach a class, when I have a big block of time, I'll fill it for prepping and feel like I ought to spend a lot of time preparing. And often what I found was it doesn't go as well as I had hoped. And then I noticed this pattern that when I was pressed for time, I had other deadlines, and oh my God, I'm not ready for class, and I'm scrambling to get ready, it goes brilliantly. And I'm like, look, the ratio is off here. And what I discovered was when I was rushed for time to prep, I focused on what mattered. I looked at my syllabi and went, okay, this week we're doing this. We've talked about these things. Here are the patterns of misconceptions the students have had. I get right at the heart of it. I put materials together that address those issues, and it not only goes fine, it actually goes better in many cases. And I've had the same experience with writing, where I end up writing something that's just endless, and I'm beating the crap out of the idea. And then I realize I've said it 5 times. I'm not exaggerating. I've just reiterated the same thing over and over again. When I'm pressed for time, I'm like, what is the core, right? And then it comes out because and so I haven't learned to do it as well as I'd like, but part of the learning is if I just get right at the center of the thing from the beginning, I'm going to spend less time on it, right?
The 80-20 principle is another one I'm a big fan of. Do 80% of things good enough, and then focus your real efforts on 20.
Yeah.
20%, that grant proposal that you really want to get, you really want that thing, you're really competitive for it, focus on that paper and I even do that with papers, like I might focus, I might do 80-20 principle, like, okay, this paper is like one that I know is going to be really important, it's really, something that I want to be known for, blah, blah, and I'll put all my effort in it. Other ones I'm kind of like, yeah, this is good enough, it'll work for this journal, it's fine. Which I think I almost do to a fault sometimes. I actually wonder this about myself regularly, like if I'm almost too, but.
Well, right, and then you'll never keep up with everything. It's just a statement of fact. And somebody's going to be disappointed and even mad. And so this is going to come across maybe as pessimistic or something, but I've developed this approach where I know for a fact that at any given time somebody's disappointed with me. Right? And I've learned to live with that, because if I spend my time worrying about, I'm disappointing all these people, I'm late on this, I'm late on that, right? That's an enormous amount. And even if that's your focus, you're still not going to catch up. So that 80% kind of principle, and then I take this approach of, it was me, I did it, I was late. What can I do to resolve it? That way, I'm owning that I've disappointed somebody, and then my approach is how do we resolve that? And what happens is it's very disarming, right? Somebody's mad about something, and you say, "I know, it was me. I didn't do it." So what do we do now to resolve it? And it changes the whole dynamic from "I'm mad at you" to "we're solving a problem together," and right, the whole mood changes, and you resolve the issue and you move on, and you don't carry all that negativity forward. So the idea that people are going to be disappointed, right? Papers are going to get turned in late, bills are not going to get paid on time. Somebody's going to yell at you about something, right? That's just how it is.
Coincidentally, this is usually the strategy you take with reviewer 2, right? It's, you're right, it was me, this was wrong, how can we fix it?
Exactly. Right.
I'm usually reviewer 2, and
You're
I'm
usually
late,
reviewer 2.
actually, so
Exactly.
sometimes I have a couple of weeks.
Transferable skill.
So this is a 3-part question. 1, how have you struggled with work-life balance? 2, do you think you've achieved work-life balance? And 3, how long did it take you to get there? Sorry, I know that's like a mouthful, but they all kind of connect.
Sure. So I'll answer it really briefly. So the first question, yes, I have. Right?
Or what ways?
I think in all the ways we've described, probably.
Okay.
And then the third part was.
Do you think you have achieved it now?
Yeah.
And then how long did it take you to get to the place
Well,
where you're like, yes?
yeah. So I think, like for me, it's an ongoing, ever evolving, because things change, right? I mean, I've been the department chair for about 5 months, so all of a sudden I have a whole new set, right? You're students now, you'll be faculty eventually, right? So the whole dynamic will change. So you have to accept that it's an evolving, that work-life balance is evolving, and so there's no achievement. I mean, there's no completion of the task, right? It's just evolving, yeah. Don't imagine you're going to somehow discover this perfect formula and everything will be cozy from there out. It's ever evolving.
Go ahead.
Sure. So I'm gonna say yes to the first question as well, but I'm gonna throw this in here that your perception of work-life balance is just that, right? It's your perception of this. So you're going to make the choice to say that this is the balance that I want. I'm happy with this balance. I'm content with the way that things go on right now. I'm very, this is my ideal life. And that's a conscious choice that you can make on your own. If you let it be an unconscious choice, it will be, and it'll probably bother you. You'll probably always think in the back of your mind, I'm not balanced, I don't have this. But whether you think that you have balance or you think that you don't have balance, you're right. So that's, and that does take some time, right? So I think it takes a while to get there. For you to really realize what's important, right? So for you to really realize what the things are that you want to spend your time doing, the things that you can really fall in love with the process doing, and I think that part is really important. You'll find those things that give you that separation, and for me, I think that it has been an ongoing process. I can't say that there was ever, it was just, it was my first 3 years of grad school, or I got it after my second year as an assistant professor, or that I walked out of high school with this balance. It's not that. It's never that. You're always going to have things, right? You're going to have kids. You're going to take on the department chair, right, role, and there's always going to be something that throws a new wrinkle into what you are considering balance. But it's still always going to be up here, right? It's always going to be that. No, this is a challenge that I want, right? Like I've always thought about having kids and been building this into my life. Or, the department chair was the right role for me right now, and this is something that I want to add to my life. So you want it, and it becomes, the next part of what you're doing to balance your life out, because it's a choice that you're making. And I think if you look at your life like that holistically, you can't. It'll be much harder to be out of balance, right? The things that'll throw you will be those really tragic or really obscene things that happen that you just really couldn't prep for, that you could never plan. Those tragedies of life might throw you out of for a little bit, but it's on you to kind of make that conscious decision that this is, these are the important things, and this is okay for me, right? This is the way that I want to live my life. There's a last part, or did I hit them all?
Do you think you've achieved it? How long did it take you to get there, and how have you struggled?
Yeah, so I think I did.
Yes.
So I guess, let's see, how have I struggled? I definitely have. I have a history of depression as well, which I feel like a lot of people don't talk about, but is real, and I think that actually forced me to get more work-life balance. Particularly, I found that exercise is really important, and my meditation is really important, and so I basically know that I have to do those things or it will catch up with me. So that has been really important for me personally, in terms of just kind of either you do this or it's going to be ugly. I think it probably, I mentioned I basically really feel like I started working on this probably later in grad school. The last 6 months of my dissertation were not an example of that, but there's often that push to finish, and that was ugly. And it definitely is a process, but I do actually feel for the most part like I have gotten there, and I think that really the true moment when I feel like, I think my son was really it. Not because necessarily I did something magical at that moment, but because I suddenly had this other thing in my life that put everything in a different perspective of like, you know, all of those things that I was worried about just pale in comparison now. So I really only find myself, I'm not saying that I don't ever have like, you know, I don't ever worry about other people's expectations or any of those things, but I feel like I find myself much more concerned about the things that really do matter in my work life and in my non-work life. And I think one thing that I certainly am guilty of, and I see happen a lot, and I think it goes back to the point that you were making about either you decide you have a work-life balance or you don't, is that, and I do this myself now, like I think to myself, oh, once I get done with this deadline, or once I get through this semester, or once I blah, 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 then I will be happy, balanced, better, blah, blah, blah. Your life is right now. It is right now. And you will, how many of you feel really busy? Yeah, it is relative. It is relative. I felt really busy when I was in grad school. And now I'm just like, oh my God, that was a cakewalk, you know, like compared to the things that I have to do now. And it really, it's going to fill in. Your life is going to fill in, just like your budget will. Like, it's true, so true. So it's like, basically, it's like you have to accept it for what it is. I had a colleague that used to say it was, I asked him one time, I said, you know, does it ever get any better? And he said, no, it's about managing the guilt. And I think that's basically what you were saying. And I think there's truth to that. And I don't even know that that makes it sound like it's a negative thing. And I think it really is more just about recognizing what matters and what doesn't. And so your life is right now. Don't wait for that next thing. Say, okay, I'm always going to have, you know, some level of stress. I'm always going to have something that is going to cause me some semblance of anxiety. Like that's life, or at least that's life for me. I don't know, maybe it's not for everybody, but for me, that's life. There's always something that's giving me some amount of anxiety, and I think being able to say, okay, that is always going to exist, but look at all this other stuff. Look at this adorable little kid I have in my life. Look at the amazing grad students I have. Look at how well the students are doing in my class. Look at this paper that I just published. Look at blah, blah, blah. To be able to sort of balance all of those things, because I think for a lot of people, human nature is to focus on that one thing that's anxiety-ridden, and then you want to get to that next point, and guess what? Something else is coming down the pipeline. So, yeah.
I really want to plug this in because I was thinking about this on the way over. Differentiating between good stress and bad stress, right? So I've got a book chapter that I'm working on now, and I'm really fired up about, but I'm stressed about meeting the deadline. But it's good stress, right? It's not tearing me apart. It's certainly on my mind. And then there's negative stress, which wears you out. So I think being able to recognize the sources of stress and differentiate between the two has been really useful for me to go, yes, I'm stressed, but it's not actually bothering me, right? Versus the other where.
So we find there's a separation in stress like that, right? So you have eustress, which is good stress, and stress, which is bad stress. And so
Stressful stress.
Yeah, stressful stress. And generally, you can break it down into two major determinations, right? So challenges and hindrances. And I think that even goes back to what you're saying, right? Like, well, it's such a, I've got all these things, it's hindering my way to, get the things done that I want to get done. But you guys are here because, you probably like challenges, you like being productive, you like thinking about the thing that you want to think about. So guess what? You're going to keep doing that, right? Like you're going to keep having to think about this stuff. You're going to keep having to produce things about, the thing that you're interested in, right? Like it doesn't stop, right? Until, they're carving out your tombstone, there's always going to be something going on. That's what life is, you doing stuff. So it's, you can't just be waiting for that moment that, like you're saying, there's always that next thing, or I'll be happy when, right? That the when is now, right? Like, live in the now. It's their way to go.
Dr. Yusuf?
Okay, so I just have a few things to add because I think like our panelists, I didn't just wake up one morning and say, oh my God, I have work-life balance. Right? That's not how it happens, but I think for me, I would say that, where I am today, I'm actually very happy with my work-life balance. And I think it partly was because I realized that my time is very finite, and that I basically had to figure out, I reached a point where I actually figure out what worked for me, right? And so it's an iterative process. When I was in grad school, I was a multitasker. I would do a little bit here, a little bit there, and actually that is how I work, right? A little bit here, I dabble, and in a way, most of the time I get something done. But in the last 2 years, I've taken on a lot of administrative responsibility that I can't really dabble. Because people actually expected that I'd be at meetings at 9 o'clock. And I'd be at another meeting at 10 o'clock. And then, oh yeah, we're going to have a meeting at 2 o'clock. So it was also about me to step back and say, okay, how I work, I'm recognizing how I work, how do I make that work with the constraints that other people are putting on me? Right? And on top of that, I have a kid who's now in elementary school. Right? And so it's also about setting expectations. And so I'm in the office at 8. I'm generally not in the office after 3 o'clock because the kid gets off the bus at 3:30, right? And so early on in the semester, people who want to meet with me know 8 to 3. Under various circumstances, like faculty senate, which I can't control, I'm on campus after 3 o'clock. But 8 to 3. You want to meet with me? You work within those constraints. At night, I dabble. So I might check email when Keegan's asleep and I'm watching TV and I'm getting caught up in other stuff. But within the 8 to 3 time frame when I'm not meeting, it's like get things done, so I can actually go home and be there at the bus stop when I need to be at the bus stop. And I think before this, without that pressure, I was kind of going, okay, well, what I've been doing works. I've gotten from point A to point B. I need to be where I need to be. But I think having that additional constraint forced me to rethink a little bit kind of how my schedule works or doesn't work. But again, about managing the guilt, I think that's always a big deal. I felt like I've always done a pretty good job with my now 9-year-old. And and all of a sudden, about 3 weeks ago, he's like, Mom, you've never been on any of my school field trips. And I was just like, dude, he's right. But by the same token, I said, well, your dad has been to every single field trip. And I don't see any other mom coaching soccer. Because I coach a soccer team on Tuesdays and on Saturdays. So I said, you're right. I haven't been to any of your field trips. But you didn't really miss out much, considering all of this time that you got to run around the soccer field with me. So it's about choices. Would you rather I go on the field trip and not coach soccer? Or he said, no. You're a good soccer coach. So, but again, but there was that guilt. I was like, step back and wait a minute.
Yeah.
Do I have to be at every single field trip? What value added is there from my being at every single field trip? And to be perfectly honest, also recognizing my weaknesses, I can't stand one kid. I cannot stand a busload of kids. That is stress. Like stressful stress. But again, I think I've also gotten better about saying, oh well, no worries. I don't meet a deadline or I accidentally miss a meeting. Like, oh well. Before this, I was, we are our most, critical. We are most critical of ourselves. And I'd be beating myself up, I can't believe I missed this meeting. I can't believe I didn't meet this deadline. And it's like, oh well. My grad students hear me say it all the time. No worries. Last week I said, I told my grad students, I was just not able to grade all the assignments. I apologize, it's taken me longer. And they're like, oh, don't worry. We appreciate the feedback that you give us, so when you get that to us, it'll be fine. The whole time I'm thinking, oh my God, I have to grade, oh my God, I have to grade. And it's just like, oh. They're like, don't worry about it. We value your feedback. When you get it to us, you get it to us.
So what final advice or the biggest nugget of advice you could give someone, especially hopefully soon to be faculty members, advice for achieving work-life balance?
I think we've all kind of said it already, but live now, right? You've got to be happy with what you're doing.
Yeah, I think one of the things that threads through these comments, I think it might just pull them further together, is purpose. I think one of the defining factors is when I feel less in control of that balance is when I've lost sight of my purpose. And so in my work, I'm focused on looking at these incongruences between the standards in the field and what we ought to be. And I found myself from time to time, I get pulled into being an apologist for tradition. And I wait a minute, that's not my purpose. That's not why I got into academics. I got into academics to point out the underlying flaws in education and educational leadership. And so when I reconnect to my purpose, the balance, to some degree, reveals itself. And so I'm in a period of that clarity. I maintain a statement on my research program. So I don't do this and that and this and that. I have a research program, and I deviate from that when opportunities, when I should say no and I don't. But I try to maintain a focus on a program. And so as that research program evolves, I rewrite that statement. And as I get a little fractured in what I'm working on, I go back to that statement and I say, I'm here primarily for this. My teaching should emanate from my research program. My writing emanates from this. My service emanates from this. I'm a associate editor of a journal, and I turn down, when I maintain my balance best is when I'm turning down review opportunities that aren't clearly in my area. Where I lose track is where I go, well, that's close to my area. I accept it because I feel like I haven't accepted a manuscript in a while. I feel like I owe them, and then my balance gets out of whack because I've lost track of my core purpose. So I think that would be true. I think it's very true of doctoral students. I mean, we have lots of purposes, but one of the things I miss about being a doctoral student was like 20 years ago for me, but was my central focus on my topic, right? That, like, to have that really clear focus was great, but as faculty, you should maintain that as well.
Let's see, I guess I would say, I think it's true that you're harder on yourself than anybody else, and that oftentimes the expectations you have for yourself might not actually be real. Tiffany, I'm going to use you as an example really quickly. Tiffany was panning, I haven't gotten my prospectus yet. I'm so sorry, it's coming. And I was like, Tiffany, I'm totally not thinking about that. Don't worry. Sometimes I think we have these deadlines in our minds, and we have this expectation in our mind that we think other people have for us. Mm-hmm. And I think when you free yourself from that, I mean, ultimately everybody is very focused on themselves, first and foremost. And teaching is a good example of that. Sometimes I'll teach a class and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I have all this material that I didn't cover, and oh, I thought maybe I would do this, but I ran out of time to do this. The students don't know all of the things that I thought I was going to do. They only know what I actually did. And they thought I was great. So sometimes I create this expectation. I feel like I failed, but in reality I succeeded, but because I'm comparing it to this expectation in my mind, it's actually making me feel worse. So I think it's important to recognize to recognize that the expectations that you think other people have for you might not actually be exactly what you think they are, and that if you have expectations for yourself that come from your sense of purpose and what drives you and is interesting for you and what makes you feel fulfilled, that's going to be the expectations that are going to drive you in a really positive way and are going to get you that good stress as opposed to the bad stress, because the bad stress comes from those outside expectations or what we perceive as them being there. Well, definitely, I check out the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. It's phenomenal. take all the core webinars that they offer, learn to plan your time, but understand that it really is a process. Like, efficiency is a process that is never ending. Like, I don't know that I've ever made a to-do list for myself for the week and crossed everything out. I honestly do not think that that has actually happened. And oftentimes, if it does, I get to Friday and I'm like, oh, I've only got like 3 things left. Maybe I'll take the afternoon off. Like, that's often what ends up happening, is that I don't end up like doing them because I'm like, oh, that is so good enough right now that I'm gonna take advantage of this like feeling of freedom that I have to go do something that I enjoy doing. You're never gonna achieve everything, and I think ultimately it's about finding the ability to be realistic with yourself. I used to make to-do lists that were like literally a month's worth of stuff that I thought I was gonna do in a week. And part of one of the things that I think I learned from the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity, which is way too long of a name, is to actually put time to the tasks and how long I thought they were going to take me. And it's amazing when I would add it up, and it would be like 120 hours worth of work in a week. I mean, it's just unrealistic. And so I've gotten much better at being more realistic about what I can accomplish in a week, which at first is a bit depressing because you're like, oh my God, I feel like I'm moving so slow. But then ultimately what ends up happening is you feel good about the fact that you're making progress, and that builds on itself. And what you're doing, even if it's hard at first, is you're setting yourself up to be realistic and fulfilled as you go forward. Yeah, and I think that's it. Yeah, those are my 2 things.
Dr. Youssef, are there any questions online?
Yes, we do. We actually have somebody ask the panelists what their thoughts are on the art of saying no.
That's a good one. Say no.
Without guilt.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, one of the new experiences I'm having as the chair is I've got faculty coming to me and saying, I need to say no to something. And so I'm giving them, they don't need my permission, frankly, but I'm giving them okay, like, yes, you need to prioritize on your writing now. You cannot take on another dissertation committee. So, I just think you just need to say no, just without guilt. Yeah.
I think it's kind of like managing a toddler. From all that mine doesn't speak yet, but well, kind of, but not really. But like, it's almost like an option. Like, one thing to do, like, because often it's like someone will come to you, and you guys are in a different situation than we are in terms of the hierarchy of power is a little bit different. It's really, I think it's harder to say no to your advisor than it is to say no to your chair. I think it just is, you know. I mean, like, ultimately we're still independent in a way that is different when you're a student. And I think one way to do that is to say, so if your advisor comes to you and says, I want you to do this thing, and you're like, oh, I don't want to do that thing because it's going to take too much time, it's something maybe for them, blah, blah. I think that you have to say, okay, I can do that, but that means that I won't have time to do X and Y. And if I'm going to finish, I need to do X and Y. Like, so could, and have alternatives. I think that particularly in those situations, no can't be the whole sentence. It has to be, you have to kind of maneuver that a little bit more because time is finite. One of the things that Carrie Ann Rockmore, the Center for Faculty Development, blah, blah, she says, it doesn't matter how much money you have. You still only have 24 hours in a day. There is no way to increase the number of hours you have in a day. Yes, you can delegate, but you still only have 24 hours in a day. And if you're going to finish your thesis, you've got to fill those with the things that matter. And so I think basically pointing out that, yes, I have finite time, and if I do that, I can't do this. And then letting the person, kind of putting it back on them to make that choice of...
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah.
I think that's, and there's actually another thing, sorry. I'm going to call it Faculty Diversity Center because it's just too long. She actually has an email, one of the Monday motivators is on the art of saying no. It's really good. We did a grad course. It was amazing.
Well, and I'll say that saying no is not necessarily something that I find easy as well. And sometimes you can't say no immediately because you you either don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, or there are kind of the power dynamics that come into play. So I've always been a believer in, I'm not in a good position to commit right now. I need to figure out how this could fit. Let me get back to you.
Yeah, that's good.
And most of the time, after I've said that, I feel better about once I actually have the time to kind of craft the response, I'm much more comfortable saying no. It's harder to say no off the bat. But, I don't have a good handle on my time right now. Can you give me a few days for me to consider how this would fit in, how I could do this? And then I come back and I really can't do it. But I need the time to, rather than off the cuff saying no, strategize how to be more politically correct or polite about saying no. Because instinctively it's hard to say no.
Well, the other thing that occurs to me, connected to what you were saying about our perceptions of what other people think, right? Somebody comes to your door and they say, could you do this thing, right? And all of a sudden we're attaching all this meaning to it.
Yeah.
They're just looking for somebody to be on their committee or whatever the question is, right? And so we often, and if we say no, they go, okay, and they're disappointed, they walk down to the next door, right? And we've spun it up into this whole thing, oh my goodness, what will happen if? And they're just going, would you stop contemplating, say yes or no, I'm ready to move on to the next person, right? So don't, and sometimes there is more to it, and you have to be cognizant of that. But, think through, is this a bigger deal than it really is? And if it's not a big deal, then just say no.
And I think the harder thing is often saying no to things that you really do want to do, but you don't have time. That's and that one, I have one of my colleagues is really good at saying her strategy for that is to say, I would really like to do this. However, I can't do it in the time frame that you say. I can do it by X date. Mm-hmm. And then basically kind of ends it back on the person to say, okay, yes, I can extend the deadline to this, or we can work around this, or maybe I can bring in this other person to help you, whatever. It kind of then becomes a strategizing with the other person to get it done. But that's one of her ways of handling that, because that will increasingly happen where you're just like, oh, that sounds really cool, that sounds really interesting. And no is something that's been, that I've had to do a lot of with a baby. I can't do as much, particularly when he's little. I have to say no to a lot more things than I might like to. And that's hard sometimes, but he's pretty cute, so that works.
Any other questions? Online or in the audience?
Proud, but
Well, we have a minute, so I'd ask you all, have you achieved work-life balance?
Some days.
some days are better than
That's a
others.
good start.
Yeah.
When do you feel best about it? When do you feel, when are the stretches of time where you feel like, yeah, I can do this? Are there things that are there threads between those? Is it, well, I've been working out a lot and that makes me feel good, or I'm not trying to spend all my time at the office, or, yeah.
I think when there are days that I go home and I get that urge to start working, I'm like, you know what? I've got enough time in the week and I can do it tomorrow, and then just get to sit there and chill and hang out with my dog. That's the times that I feel like, all right, maybe I've got this down a little bit more than I think that I do.
I think the one thing that we kind of hinted at that might be worth pulling out all the way is and we talked about writing routines, but I think also just routines in general. So one of the disadvantages, sort of an advantage and disadvantage of academic life, is you can do whatever you want. My mother-in-law, when we were negotiating childcare, she was like, "Do you have to go to work?" And I'm like, "Susan, I never have to go to work, right? I could work from home every single day, and I could even play hooky and do nothing the whole day. Now, I'll pay for it, of course, right? And so that amorphous kind of, I could work at midnight, I could work at 6 in the morning, is a huge advantage, but it's also a burden. It can be a burden. So for me, I work at work. I go to work, and if I have deadlines, I work at home. But by and large, I tinker. If I do something at home, it's often I'm just tinkering. I'm wondering if there's any literature on this, and I'm not really serious about it. I'm just sort of looking, But so the routine, I think, is critical. Otherwise, you're at home, and I'm feeling like I ought to work. And the more clear your routine is, then this is the time that I work.
Yeah. I always feel so much more on top of everything in the spring and fall semesters compared to the summers, where things are less structured.
Right.
Because then you have to kind of make your own schedule as opposed to I have to teach it this time, then I have a lab meeting, then I have this, then I have time to run experiments. Whereas in the summer, it's like, well, I guess I'll just run an experiment today if I can.
Right.
Not, all right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you find that in your own language was maybe I'll do this right, and you can even hear your own. I try to bust myself on that, like, that's tentative. That means I probably won't, right? So I try to be more definitive in my own, outward language and inward language about what I hope to accomplish. Even I just did it. What I hope to accomplish, right, as opposed to what I will accomplish. Because then you leave yourself an open door. Well, I might get it done, I might not.
Well, I want to use this as a good opportunity to just very briefly plug one of the spring workshops that we have, because in the spring, one of the workshops will be on managing in the home stretch. And so now when you're doing coursework, for example, it's very structured, right? Your faculty member says, or your advisor says, these are your deadlines. When you're past exams, and now you actually have to work at your own pace on your dissertation, we found that a lot of students struggle with that flexibility, with the lack of that external, with that, those schedules that are imposed on you. And so the managing in the home stretch workshop will basically we'll have some more senior graduate students and junior faculty talk about what are some of the strategies for you to manage that process more effectively, because when you're working on a dissertation, it can't be, I feel like I'm working today, so I'll work, right? And even when we have tentative deadlines with the advisor, or I'll get my committee this by March 15th. March 10th rolls around, I'm not going to meet that deadline, and they're going to be okay. It's not like I'm going to fail something. I'll just push that deadline out, right? And so that home stretch is where sometimes our students really struggle because of that lack of focus. So that workshop will really kind of hone in on some of the issues that our students will kind of deal with in the home stretch. So just a plug for in the spring semester, that'll be one of the workshops we're going to be hosting.
Well, in the interest of work-life balance, we're ending 30 minutes ahead of time.
Yeah, very good.
So you can either work or enjoy your life. Okay, so thank you for coming. I think, do we have any more events this semester?
We do have one more workshop on November 17th, which is on developing your e-portfolio. So we will actually have Megan Mize out of the Center for High Impact Practice come out and talk about why an e-portfolio can be beneficial for you, and then we'll actually have kind of some time for you to work through. What are some of the things you need to think about when you're developing your e-portfolio? What needs to go into an e-portfolio, and how you use that e-portfolio to kind of sell yourself on the job market. If you are here for PFF credit, please note I don't have little sheets today, so you do need to go to the PFF worksheet to receive credit for the PFF event towards the PFF certificate. If you are attending the event for the PFP certificate, you do need to kind of keep track of those events and post reflections to your e-portfolio. But other than that, I thank our panelists and Jamila for moderating, and thank you so much for coming on Friday.